Well, hello again, Rose.
Hello, Erin, and hello, Tom.
Excuse me. I would like to start off. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, we have your press release, but I'd like to hear it in your words.
All right. Well, my name is Rose Solari. My most recent book is also my first novel. It's called The Secret Woman. Um, I started my writing career primarily as a poet. I've also worked a lot in journalism. I have two books of poems and a play called Looking for Guinevere. And when I was working for a New Age magazine, I stumbled across some material about the history of women's spirituality that got me interested in the subject matter that would become the novel. I had, before that, become interested in paganism and begun to follow that path, primarily with one priestess teacher who's local to here. But the book, in many ways, is a reflection, though it is fiction, of my own journey from being raised Catholic to finding the underlying mysticism that the Catholic Church had overwritten with its own new ideas, that beneath it all was the old religion.
How long have you been studying paganism?
I would say probably about 15 years, maybe 20. But as I think I always was instinctively a pagan. I think from the time I was very small, I had intuitions of things or presentiments of things that didn't really quite fit into the Catholic framework that I was being raised in. And my mother was kind of a little bit of a witch on the sly. Her family was Sicilian Italian, and there's a strong pagan tradition in Sicily. And when my dad wasn't home, if he was off at a meeting or something, he was a very, very strict and observant Catholic. Sometimes she'd take out the Ouija board or get out playing cards and do a kind of tarot. And I knew from very early on that she communicated with the dead. When members of our family would die, they would often come to my mother and talk to her. And she spoke about it as just a normal part of what is. And so I think I learned that very early, that the veils between the worlds are pretty thin. And very often our own intuitions and our own wisdom will lead us to see when they drop, to see what happens on the other side, to maybe even cross over a bit. So I think it was always with me, really.
Oh, that's amazing. I think this has been an experience that a lot of us have had, that even when we weren't raised as pagan, that when we look back, that we've seen that ourselves, that what we've been doing has been a lot of connecting with nature, especially.
Yes. And also with images of the divine feminine. One of the interesting things to me about Catholicism is what a high place Mary occupies in the church. And again, especially for Italian Catholics, and all four of my grandparents were born in Italy. So I think Italian Catholicism in particular is very mystically wrapped around the figure of Mary. I know for my grandmothers, for example, she was a much more important person to pray to than God. But you hit puberty and you think, well, but wait, she's a virgin. Oh, wait, okay, so she's a virgin before and after? Oh, wait. And there's something that doesn't quite add up. And so it was interesting to me when I discovered that beneath those layers that the church added later on, there is this strong vein of worship of a female divinity and respect for and honoring of a female divinity.
That's awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Keeps on making me think of another book, of course, the Da Vinci Code, but...
Yes. Well, and there's a great book. I don't know if you know this one. It's not a novel. It's nonfiction, but Marina Warner wrote a fabulous book called Alone of All Her Sex that really traces all the different layers beneath what's come to be virgin worship in the church, tracing that back to various goddess origins. It's really fascinating. Really fascinating. So that was what led me back, and I traveled to England to do research for the novel. The heroine of my novel is a contemporary woman, but she comes into possession of a box of documents left behind after her mother has died. And she realizes that her mother was doing research on a 12th century woman mystic. But the further she gets into it, just as I'm talking about these layers underneath Christianity that lead to the old religion, the further she gets into it, the more she begins to discover those layers underneath and becomes more taken up with a pagan kind of spirituality. And so she then travels to England which is where her mother learned about it, and follows her mother's footsteps from London to Oxford to Glastonbury, the great pagan holy site, where she comes up for some interesting revelations, not only about the 12th century woman, but about her mom and her mom's initiation into Wicca.
You must be picking questions out of my head because you're answering several of them before I can even ask them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I prefer it that way.
Well,
go ahead, Thomas.
well, then, do you think? Because another thing that I've noticed a pattern with a lot of our pagan friends in our circles and all that is that if you go back like one generation, but the generation before that, like the grandparents and all that, with the way that they felt with a lot of their beliefs of raising Christianity, Catholicism, and all that, and how they have viewed what paganism like compared to like what the more recent generations do. Has that given you any sort of idea of what the generation gap of beliefs have been like?
That's an interesting question. I think that I think people fall into two broad groups. Mm-hmm. I do believe that all of us have experiences of the divine. I believe we all have experiences where, as I said, the veils between the worlds drop and you get information. And it may not always be information you want, but it's probably important. I think that happens to everyone, whether they say, I just had a premonition this was going to happen, or I had a dream and then 2 weeks later it happened. But I think people fall into two basic groups as far as that goes. Either you accept that, take responsibility for it, investigate it, and want to learn more about it, or it frightens you and you think that you need a priest or a minister or somebody else to mediate it for you.
Yeah.
And growing up in my early life as a Catholic, I think there was very much an emphasis on you need the priest to interpret it for you. But of course, you can see how that comes about. Who does that benefit? Right?
Yeah.
It's the institution that's assigned the interpretation. And I think very, very early on, I thought, well, wait, I don't need a hierarchy to tell me what this means. I can look at it and see what it means. I can investigate it myself. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sure there's folks all along the way on the continuum, but I do think those are two broad categories. People are scared of ghosts, people who aren't scared of ghosts. People who'd like to know what might happen next, people who absolutely don't want to know what might happen next. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. Because the way I saw it when I was first reading the book, because it was like when your character was at the funeral of your mother and all that, it was almost like as if she had an interpretation of what her mother was like, and then she makes this discovery of those documents. Mm-hmm. And it was like that she had made a discovery of a persona of her mother that was never there before. Yes,
absolutely. And how sad in certain ways it was that for Louise, I think my heroine, that she didn't know those things about her mother while her mother was still alive to discuss them. However, she's still actively communicating with her mother after her mother's gone, and accepts that as what is. It doesn't frighten her. She doesn't think. She does talk to a very interesting priest early on, who is, I think, a wonderful character and one of the good ones as far as the Catholic Church goes. And he's a liberation theologian. They're my favorites anyway. But she ultimately comes to take responsibility for this information and investigate it herself. And I think that's very important. Also, of course, it's tied to the fact that she's an artist.
My mom is very much alive, so I can't relate to that aspect. But I have always wondered about my own ancestry, and I've been trying to do some research on my own, and it can relate to that of trying to find out more about the feminine lineage. Yes. And taking that upon yourself to go and research and to but try and retrace those footsteps. And I very much could relate to that. My own grandmother, who has passed on, was always very much into her Irish heritage and would love to go visit Ireland in very much a similar pattern that Louise has traveled. And
yeah,
I loved that storyline.
It becomes a real pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think anybody on any level, whether it is through a religious path, or even just to find out more about your family in general, can relate to that. Want to learn more, to find out where you come from, and to find out how somebody else's struggles can even mirror your own without even knowing. It could be generations ago, but history does repeat itself, and just interesting to find out those things.
Absolutely, Erin. I think you're completely right, and that was very important to me writing the book. That those various strands, that each layer of generations, the women have all these threads connecting them together that are so important to uncover.
So now we looked at like your background, and you've started to go like with poetry, and then I also noticed that you've done like a one-act play as well.
Mm-hmm. And quite a lot of journalism. I love I consider myself primarily a poet. Poetry is my first love. It was the first thing that really made me want to devote myself to writing and teaching reading. But I love writing in all forms, and it's more, I think, a question of when an idea comes to you or an inspiration comes to you, finding the right form for it. And these layers of ideas, I mean, you've got 3 narratives in A Secret Woman. You've got the 12th century woman, the mom, and the daughter. And there's no way to pack that into a poem or even a series up all those layers.
Yeah.
But I mean, my journalism work was profoundly helpful to me, especially on a spiritual level, because I was working for a New Age magazine where I got to interview a lot of really great pagan thinkers. And so that was very helpful. I mean, meeting Margo Adler and talking to Margo Adler was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me.
Oh, I'm certain.
Well, her book, Drawing Down the Moon, is just, I think, one of the greatest books about contemporary paganism. It's fantastic. And she was so inspiring to me. And she gave me a great answer, because I was looking back at some of your podcasts, which I think are wonderful, by the way. I love your show. And the one about coming out as a Wiccan, I thought was so powerful, because I got lucky on that front. I was able to be very open very early. But she said a very interesting thing to me when she was in a debate with a Christian minister about it. And he said, well, what if you've led other people down the wrong path? And she said, we're not evangelical. We don't go out and convert. So if I die and I'm wrong and there's a Christian hell, well, I'm going, but that's all I'm responsible for. She said, if you're wrong, then you have the Inquisition, the forced conversion of native peoples.
Oh, yeah.
You have a huge list of people that you've proselytized to and led down the wrong road. We don't do that. And that was one of the most powerful answers I ever got to the question of how do you answer people if they say, but what if you're wrong? And I thought that was just absolutely brilliant. And I've held it close to me ever since.
There was the whole debate that's been going on with like the right for marry for gays and lesbians.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that some will debate that, if we don't stay conventional with the traditional marriage, the world is going to burn for it.
Right.
But we're not going to burn because the fact that what we did, like to the Native Americans, for example, that was completely fine.
Or segregation.
I'd be far more worried about the consequences for what we've done with colonization and with global warming, I gotta say. I think the destruction of our atmosphere is something we're going to really pay for.
I apologize, I didn't word that right there. But then on another subject too, then, because you mentioned about how the fact that that the women have went over to time, do you also have studied in the concept of reincarnation?
You know, reincarnation is an area I am not very strong on. I have to say, I don't have a lot of knowledge about it.
Okay.
I think, I mean, it's fascinating to me, and I definitely have a sense that there are alternate lives going on simultaneously. But I almost feel, I think for me personally, as a writer and as a thinker, that's enough to try to get my mind around for now. And maybe in a few years I'll be able to think about who I might be next or who I might have been before. But I think right now for me, I'm more excited about and more interested in the ways that the veils drop right here, as with in the moment in the book when Louise's mom appears. Well, there are a couple moments in the book when Louise's mother comes to her.
Oh, yes.
And puts her hand on her arm, or she smells her mother's perfume and she knows her mother's there. Those moments right now, I think, to me in everyday life are very important, and I'm paying lots of attention to them. But I've delved much less into what might have been before or after in a more linear timeline, if that makes sense.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. I was just curious.
Yeah.
That thought popped in my head because they had that movie that came out not too long ago. I forget its name. That Tom Hanks and Halle Berry were in.
Right.
The Cloud Atlas.
Cloud Atlas. There we go. Which that dwelled on that whole very concept
of finding your partner, your soulmate through time and space, and no matter what life you're living, you're connected to this one individual or these people that keep showing themselves up in various forms. I do believe in that to an extent, absolutely.
Well, and I think we all have had the experience. Again, I don't know if everyone names it this way or if it frightens some people, but I think we've all had the experience of, say, meeting someone and thinking, I know you. I've known you before. And in my book, Louise's older sister, Catherine, is a Buddhist. And that is, of course, a very big part of Buddhism, is reincarnation. And they have a discussion in there on Christmas, in fact. It's the first Christmas after their moms died. And Catherine says that she realized very early on that she had known her mother before and always would, that they had known each other in previous lives, they'd know each other in future lives, that it was just all connected, that they would always know each other. So having Catherine as a character in the book allowed me to introduce some other ideas and ways of looking at things. She's a Buddhist. Brother Paul, the priest who first gives Louise the box, is a radical Catholic. So there were other faiths incorporated into the book as well. Again, to show that I'm not proselytizing for Wicca. That's my way. But these are other ways also of seeing these different levels of reality.
Yeah, and that's something that we've also mentioned numerous times in our episodes as well. When we make references to the other beliefs, is not that we're trying to knock them at all. We're just, saying that this is historically has happened.
Yes.
And we're not trying to say that we're the better one. We're just saying, we're not like is what other people have seen us as.
Right. But this is the path that feels deeply, deeply right and true for me.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. I respect that. I come from a very eclectic religious background with many changes and people following new paths in their lives. And I, too, have researched and studied many, many, many different ways of looking at essentially the same thing, the higher power, whatever you call it. And, paganism for me is starting to feel like I, too, instinctually have known things that I never even paid attention to knowing. They just were. I never questioned it. I just did it. And it, to come to find out later on, I'm in my early 30s, and now I'm finding out that this is a whole way of life, and it's definitely resonating with me. So
yeah, and that's such an amazing feeling when you think I've carried these instincts in me, and now I can come home to them in a way.
Exactly.
You feel just like so blown away in a sense. And for me, I was kind of thankful with my family that they had no issue with me coming out of the broom closet, but especially for my mother, who had done a lot of our genealogy, like our Celtic ancestry. It was like it's in my blood.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't get very far in any Celtic or British mythology without uncovering gods. I mean, the whole Arthurian legends are all about negotiating with magic.
Well, Merlin being a big part of that, and wizardry being as prominent as it was back then. So,
and you really do believe. On my first trip to England, I not only got to Glastonbury, which was incredible, but I made it all the way to Tintagel, to the ruins where they say that Arthur was conceived. And when you see how high those cliffs are, and imagine trying to get up there, you completely understand how Merlin's magic would have been necessary to achieve that union.
Oh my God!
It is a forbidding and terrifying landscape, and there's a wood slat and rope bridge from one high cliff to another, and standing there, you can almost feel the power of the magic in the stones. It's really incredible.
I take it you must have been to Stonehenge too.
Yep, and Avebury. I've made a few pilgrimages in England. I got to spend 2 terms with the Center for Creative Writing in Oxford last spring, which was the culmination of a kind of a lifelong dream. But there are many beautiful spiritual sites in England where you really feel, because of the oldness of the culture, so many layers. Go ahead.
I finally looked at when I got the Google Maps on the Wii U, and you have that ability where you can actually stand on like a street address, like you're there. I did that for Stonehenge, and even just that feel, even though I was not really there, just like there in a sense of virtual sense, you can feel that sense of how much that the ancient druids had done all those rituals many moons ago, and in a sense they still are doing today.
Yes. Well, I think you feel that, and again, I think this is something that many, many people feel and maybe are afraid to say, that you can stand in particular places on this planet and feel the memories of hundreds and thousands of years. If you're sensitive at all, if you're aware at all, if you're looking, or if you can quiet your inner chatter enough, the land is full of memories. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Did your character, at any point, did you ever feel like with your character as well, that when she was trying to learn this of her mother as well, was she ever a point when you were writing her in that she had that instinct as well, that she had to get out of habit of what was taught with her with the other beliefs than compared to paganism?
Well, by the time the book picks up and we meet Louise, she hasn't been a Catholic for a long, long time. Okay. She's in that sort of in-between place that I think many contemporary people are, of just sort of no active religion at all. Her painting is her vocation. Her art is her vocation. And I do feel very strongly that devoting yourself to a life in the arts is a form of spiritual practice. But she really doesn't have much to reject because she's moved away from the Catholic Church so completely. I think the place where a lot of contemporary women lost faith with the Catholic Church, and I think Louise is a good example of this, is in all the prescriptions against sexuality. The strict rules about no divorce, the strict rules about no birth control. These are all things that are very damaging to women specifically. And I think that Louise, like many women, has moved away from that, recognizes the repressiveness of that, recognizes the misogyny of that, but hasn't particularly replaced it with anything other than her pursuit of her art. But she does trust her intuitions and she does trust her instincts, which I think most good artists do. And so she's quite open to this new force. And particularly she wants to study, when she finds her, with the priestess who trained her mother. Again, to grab that piece of that lineage you were talking about, Erin, to pick up a thread that will go back to mom. Okay, she goes through all this work to find the priestess in Glastonbury who does not want to be found, who trained her mother. And first conversation, she says, "Can you initiate me?" So she dives right in, really, with very, very little fear. And I think that can happen to people who have long been separated from any sense of spiritual tradition. They get presented with something new, and often there's a wonderful freshness and freedom of just saying, let's go see what this is about.
I think that no matter what, because she obviously, you talk about her history with her mom and a lot of anger, and as a teenager, she's very, frustrated and upset with her mom and her choices. But on some, as we see her journey, she comes to relate and understand that it was just her mother trying to find her own personal happiness. And I think no matter what feeling might have happened and the unfortunate event of that person passing on, there's that longing to try and just, you want to know, you want to have that closure. And this is almost like closure for her to say, hey, I finally get it, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't get it then.
Right.
I finally get it now. And, that inner love and peace that she comes to find by the end is just, it's powerful.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad, because one of the most astonishing things to me in my own life, both my parents passed away over a decade ago. And one of the most astonishing things to me about my relationships with both of them was discovering that those relationships continue to change and grow after they're gone. It's not that it's a static thing and when they die, that's it, and whatever state you were in with them remains. That relationship keeps changing, like everything, right? I mean, that's another important principle of our religious path, is that the one constant thing is change. And that I find a very powerful and consoling truth, that you can continue to work on and explore that relationship after they're gone and it's still changing. You can honor the things you missed long after they're gone if you keep paying attention.
Absolutely. My grandma is the one I'm connected to. She finds her way to me, and she's with my mom and my family. It's my mother's mom, and she passed away when I was 11, and I've felt connected to her my whole life. She is what Louise's mother is to Louise, my grandmother is to me.
Oh.
That's why I want to long to go to Ireland and learn where her family came from. And I've been told it's my mother, the female lineage on my mom's side, that I'm very much, there's a long history of gifts and things, and I connect with that so much. And that's why I said your book resonated with me on so many different levels.
Well, I hope you get to Ireland, but I also hope that you're finding a way to express all this information in writing or painting or dancing or journaling or something,
I too have a writing background. I went to college started college to do creative writing. I wanted to write and direct films, and unfortunately it wasn't quite the path at the time that I was meant to take, but I do journal. I have written some screenplays, or started to, and I do take time through the creative arts. I'm a big music fanatic, and I tend to channel all my stuff through music, so.
Well, that makes sense, because as I was listening to the archives, the opening music is always wonderful.
Thank you.
That's all Thomas, though.
I have a few sources that I go from for that, so. That was the same thing with myself too. What's interesting for me, the person I connect to, I never got to meet in person. It was my great-great-grandfather who immigrated over from Scotland, who ironically I was named after.
Oh.
I can just feel him also. So in my case, for me, is to get back to Scotland, because that's where most of my ancestry is. But the little town that most of my father's side rest peacefully. Every Memorial Day we go plant flowers, and I always go visit his grave, and I could just feel him right there say, "Keep on the tradition, lad."
It's wonderful. That's interesting. I mean, I do think lineage is important, but I also think other things can surprise you. I mean, as I said, all of my grandparents were born in Italy, and yet I feel a profound spiritual connection to England. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I can figure, and actually it was my husband who suggested this, and it's brilliant, is maybe your people were, when we were in Oxford last spring, he said to me, maybe your people were here with the Romans. I mean, maybe,
that could be true.
Belong to Rome. Maybe it goes back that far. So that adds some fuel to the reincarnation theory too.
That's awesome. Maybe that's your next research, is learning how far back your lineage goes, and if maybe it does take place in early European life and Middle Ages.
That could be interesting. If you ever thought of maybe doing like a next book, like if you thought of doing like this book series of this, maybe that's what your character could find out.
Well, there's definitely another book to come about Louise and Eve. I absolutely must finish my next poetry collection this summer out. I will scold myself badly for being away from it. My last book, Orpheus in the Park, came out about 6 years ago, so I'm due. But
you're itching. Your fingers are itching.
My fingers are itching for line breaks again. Does that go into the margin thing? I'm not used to that. But and that book was a great deal of it was retellings of classical mythology, which also reflects a lot of what we're talking about. But there is definitely a further adventure for Eve and Louise. For one thing, we see very little of the 12th century mystic in this book, actually. We don't see quite as much of her as we did even earlier drafts of it. And there's more to her story, and it takes her west. It takes her to Tintagel. So Louise and Eve have more exploring to do together as teacher and student. And I think that's an important thing to write about as well, because that's such an important relationship in one's life. If you are fortunate enough to have a priestess or a teacher or a witch or a priest come into your life and guide you in some way on this very beautiful but often very labyrinthine and confusing path that can be the old religion, it's so helpful to have a wise teacher to lead you. And so there's more to be said about Eve, the Glastonbury priestess, and her relationship with Louise, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to it.
Thank you. So do I. Maybe you can help me write it.
Hey, I'd love to.
We'd be honored. Oh, well.
So you'd like to know?
You've kind of picked my brain. You must have just been picking out those questions right from my head.
I hope I'm not talking too much.
Oh, absolutely not. You know what? I've been told I have the same habits. I tend to read minds apparently without realizing what I'm doing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good for us. Maybe we need to get out those moonstones and work on that a little bit.
Heck yeah, we're kindred spirits. Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share? Or
just that I'm really happy that more folks in pagan and Wiccan communities have been finding the novel. It came out last year, and I was in England when it came out, so it took me a while to get caught up to what was happening back in the States when I got back. And it was so great to hear from folks like you about it, because I think a lot of the other book groups and the readings that I've given, people appreciate the structure of the book and the literary content of the book, and I've been invited to speak to a lot of psychologists who are interested in the psychology of art, which is interesting. But the Wiccan part of it is so dear to my heart that I'm very happy and feel very grateful and blessed that people like you have read it and paid attention to it and wanted to talk to me. So just thank you. Big thank yous.
We thank you, and it's been an honor to speak with you about this and about the subject of paganism and all that.
Great. Well, let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Do you want to let our audience know real quick where they can find your book if they're unfamiliar?
It's called A Secret Woman, and my name is Rose Solari. So it's Solar with an I, Solari, and it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. You can look it up through a great thing that I love called IndieBound, where you can order it from your own independent bookstores. It has international distribution, so you can find it just about anywhere. You can buy it even on my website, which is just rosesolari.com.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
I'm real active on Facebook, so if people have questions, there's a Secret Woman page and there's a Rose Solari page on Facebook, and I do lots of giveaways. Sometimes I'll post a question about some aspect of Wicca or the old religion. If you get the answer right, you get a free book. So there's lots of ways to find out about it. But it's available through all the major book distributors.
And we'll make sure to have the links to all the contact information and all that on the description.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right. Well, then I think this has been a wonderful conversation we've had with you, Rose, here.
Well, thank you.
So this has been Thomas LionLord Punton.
And Erin Lecy.
And so we say merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Blessed be.
Blessed be. Thank you.
Blessed be.